Hello, I'm Vince Anthony, General Secretary of UNIMA-USA, and I want to welcome you to our Zoom session. And I hope that you're a member already of UNIMA-USA, and if you're not, hope you'll join after this session. We have so many wonderful programs to offer. We'd like to have you with us for all of them. And now I'd like to introduce Mary Ann Tucker, President of UNIMA-USA.
Hi, and thank you all for coming. We're really excited about this particular Zoomie. The idea for this came from Laurie Schweiger, just as I was coming into the presidency, and she said, "I really want to see a Zoomie on going from page to stage," and then proceeded to explain that she really wanted to talk about the legalities of it, so that we're not talking about adapting a story to make a script, to make a show. We're talking about the legalities of using somebody's copyrighted work to do a show. So I have three wonderful presenters. My first one is Mike Horner. He's a nationally recognized puppetry artist specializing in work for family audiences. He tours nationally and internationally with the shows, several of which have been awarded grants from the Jim Henson Foundation. And some of his recent performance venues have included the Detroit Institute of Arts, Wolf Trap National Park for the Performing Arts, and the National Puppetry Festival, which is the last place where I saw him. So take it away, Mike.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Mike Horner from What If Puppets, formerly known as Mesner Puppet Theater, and before that, Paul Mesner Puppets. So pre-COVID, when we were called Mesner Puppet Theater, we had an actual theater and presented a theater season. And when you present the theater season, you've got to fill 6 or 7 or 8 slots a year. And we found that a great way to do that is to adapt children's books into shows, because they often are a title that audiences are familiar with, and you also have that great literature connection for school audiences. As far as how we got permission to adapt books into puppet shows, it totally varied. Every situation is going to be different. Everyone will be unique, and that means from who you arrange it with, how much you're going to pay. It's totally unique in each situation. We're going to put up a slide here, my first slide that I created, to talk about the 3 ways that we approached getting permission. So the 3 ways are: ask the author. If the author is no longer living, contact the author's estate. And if there is already a published script of the book that you are wanting to do, you would work with the script licensing company. So I'll give you some examples of each of those. So first, ask the author. We'll go to our next slide here. One great thing to do is find out if there are any local children's authors in your city. That would be a great place to start, because they probably already have a reputation in your community and are probably already going into schools talking about their books. And wouldn't it be great if you did a puppet show of their book? We have a great author here in Kansas City, Missouri, Lisa Campbell Ernst. She happens to live kind of in the neighborhood where our offices are. And her version of Little Red Riding Hood was actually the most recent adaptation we've done, right before the pandemic in February of 2020. And when we reached out to her about adapting her version, she basically said, she thought it was out of print. She wasn't quite sure who held the rights, but she just said, go ahead and do it. So that was very generous of her. That I'm going to say that's going to be the exception, not the norm, that you're just going to get permission to do it without any cost. But Lisa was great. When we did the show, she came and did a book signing. We found a bunch of copies of the book online that we were able to buy. She did a book signing. We had a little event, and that was wonderful. So that's one way we met the author. She was a neighbor. We're also very lucky that we, for many years, had a children's bookstore here in Kansas City called the Reading Reptile. And the Reading Reptile would host these children's book authors for a children's literature festival. And they would invite usually about 3 authors in the town, and they would let us know which authors were coming and which books they wrote. And the bookstore asked us to choose one book for each festival and create a 15-minute version of that book to present at the festival. And this was a great opportunity for us because not only would we get to meet the author, we would get to show them what their book might look like in puppet form. And a couple examples of that. The next slide, please. This is one of Paul Messner's most popular shows back when we were Messner Puppet Theater. The True Story of the Three Little Pigs by A. Wolfe, as told to John Sheska. I believe John Sheska saw Paul's little version of this and loved it. And he wrote us a letter, wrote the company a letter, saying that he gives Paul permission to do the show now and forever. And so that was another, again, very unique situation in which the author said, yes, go right ahead. You have my permission. Go for it. And didn't charge us anything. And that became one of Paul's very popular shows and even won an UNIMA citation. So another example of an author that we met at the Children's Literature Festival on the next slide is Martha Speaks by Susan Medaw. Now, Susan loved the idea of doing the book as a puppet show. And so she put us in contact with her publisher. And we worked out the agreement through the publisher as far as what we would pay, what the agreement would be, that kind of thing. Now, this is one of those cases where there was a very unique situation. Right when we were getting ready to present Martha Speaks, PBS was adapting it as an animated show. So we also had to deal with PBS, mostly by them wanting to see what the puppets looked like and give their notes. Their big thing was that they wanted the puppet of Martha, the dog, to look a little bit closer to what the animated Martha looks like, because it looked slightly different in the animated version than in the book illustrations. But again, so we mostly dealt with the publisher through the author to come up with the agreement for that. Another book that we adapted through the Children's Literature Festival on the next slide is Bark George by Jules Pfeiffer. Jules saw our little 15-minute version of the show. He loved it. He had one note, so we made that change. For Jules Pfeiffer, we worked through his lawyer. We put us in contact with his lawyer, and we worked out the agreement with him. So unlike with Martha Speaks, it was the publisher. Here we were working with the author's lawyer. Now, here's another unique situation. We presented the show a couple times at our season. We wanted to do it a third time. We reached out to Jules Pfeiffer, and he said, well, my lawyer died, and I don't know how to do the right stuff, so sorry. So that kind of put the end to that, because Jules Pfeiffer didn't know how to negotiate the contracts, which is fine. We respect that. So there you go, three versions of reaching out to the author directly. Now, when your author is no longer living, you've got to figure out who owns the rights. Our next slide here is Georgie and the Noisy Ghosts by Robert Bright, which we presented a number of times, 3 times, I think. Robert Bright had already passed away, but his agent still held the rights and controlled the rights to his books. So we got in contact with the agent, and she worked up the agreement, and a very old school situation where, you know, she's just the one person with an assistant in an office. You know, they still had file folders and nothing was digital. But yeah, so in the case of Robert Bright, we worked with his agent who still held the rights to his books. Now, we also reached out to, the next slide, we really wanted to do Go Dog Go by P.D. Eastman. So we found that there was a P.D. Eastman estate. We reached out to them and asked for permission. They told us that the performance rights, were currently held by a play publishing company. Some children's theaters had adapted Go Dog Go into a puppet show, or no, I'm sorry, not a puppet show, into a theatrical play, and they published the script. So we were able to get the rights. Well, we'll talk about this later in just a second. But so we were able to get the rights, but through that published script. But so we tried to go through the estate. But yeah. Next slide, please. Same thing with the Snowy Day. We reached out to the Ezra Jack Keats Foundation and asked, and they said, we'd love for you to do it. But again, the performance rights are held by a play publishing company. So that gets us to the third way you can adapt a book, is by paying for a license for a published script, which is what we did with Go Dog Go and for the Snowy Day. And both of those scripts are published by Plays for Young Audiences. And so you apply to get the license, you tell them how many shows you're doing, how many audience members. I can't quite remember if the rate varies, at least for this company, based on size of audience, but there was kind of a flat fee basically per performance. And we worked out the arrangements on a per performance basis, which works great if you're running a season in a theater. If you're a touring company, it may be a little bit different, but because we were doing it as a season offering, we knew how many performances there would be. So we did Go Dog Go and Snowy Day like that, as well as our final slide here, The Little Prince. We did that before the pandemic, and there is a couple versions of the same script available to get a license for. So yeah, those are my three suggestions on how to get permission to adapt a book into a puppet show. The important thing is that you do reach out. It may take a little bit of investigating to figure out who owns the rights. If the author's alive, they can tell you. They'll be able to direct you to the right person. It'll take some legwork, but it's really important to do that legwork and make that great connection with the authors and the publishers. So thanks. That's my part of it. I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Mike. Very fun, definitely a lot of fun slides there and some really good information. Our next presenter is Therese On, and she's Therese On, sorry. And she is currently serves as the producer at the Center for Puppetry Arts. She also had a long career at CNN Worldwide, and during her career, she received numerous awards, including a Peabody, a DuPont, an Emmy, a Gold Cinemaster Series Award. And before joining CNN, she was a resident puppeteer at the Center, as well as a member of Janie Geiser's award-winning Jatte Theater Company. So, are you ready, Therese?
I am. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen here. Think know how to do this. All right. So now, so what I have here is just one slide. Sorry, trying to figure out how to see it. So I've been in this position for just 2 years. I started at the center in the marketing side, and then moved over to the producer position a couple of years ago when my colleague Kristen Haverty, who is on this call as well, moved on to other things in her life. So what you see on this screen is sort of an amalgam of things that, and the reason I mentioned Kristen is because she was critical to to procuring rights for a lot of what you see here. And there are, so on the right hand of my screen with Stella Luna, Harold and the Purple Crayon, Pete the Cat, Cat in the Hat, Click Clack Moo, and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Those, all of the rights procurement for those things preceded me, and I had a great legacy of information from both Kristen and Liz Lee, who was her predecessor, in terms of sort of how you procure rights, because those documents were still available to me. And what was important, and it is important to remember, is that, you know, those rights are not in perpetuity. You know, each time we, some have been negotiated for longer periods than others. But for example, Stella Luna is very much like what Mike was talking about. The author, Janelle Cannon, and was, you know, part of the launch of that production for us. And she came down for a book signing and one thing and another. It was a very simple process. You know, it was her and her literary agent. Other things are a little more complex. Cat in the Hat was part of the Music Theater International's adaptation that we have bought rights for. Click Clack Moo was, you know, also Pippin Properties. So they were all each a little different. So we had the author, we had, you know, we had foundations. The rights that I've been procuring for the center, Owl at Home, Poncho Rabbit and the Coyote, and the Stinky Cheese Man, all have been pretty different in terms of the approach. Stinky Cheese Man had been given rights before, so it was, you know, and it had been out, so it was pretty simple in terms of reaching out. Same to a degree with Owl at Home. The thing I would just say writ large is that you have to do your research, because to Mike's point, each property is different, and its ownership, and not just the ownership, but also who actually receives the payment. And, you know, for example, Poncho Rabbit, Abrams owns the rights, but we're actually working with Gotham to funnel the money to Abrams. So it can be a very layered situation. And because of that, patience and persistence. I mean, it took me, especially for a new title like Poncho Rabbit, we knew the author through the playwright who is adapting it for us, knows the author well. And so we knew that we had a good chance of getting the rights, but because it's an, you know, it has not been adapted before. It took almost a year for me to actually get those rights procured. So I would just say you just have to be patient, and you learn as a producer that you just keep going back. You just, you know, put a tickler in your email that says, check back every 2 weeks. Where are we? What do we need to do? What's the holdup? And then I would just say authenticity. And I reach back to Rudolph on this. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was a very tough, I'm sure, negotiation, because that property is so well known and is so precious to so many. But because it was handled with such care by Liz and Kristen and the whole creative team over the years that we've been doing it, you know, Character Arts really trusts us with that property. And pretty much anytime we go to them, they are willing to work with us for whatever kind of tweaks and things that we need to do to sort of, you know, for example, we did some colorization on the elves because we felt like we wanted to introduce some diversity into the piece, and they worked closely with us on that, and they trusted us because we worked with them through the initial process and through following up each year by sending them things to take a look and approval and that kind of thing. And that just leads to the relationship building, the trust that you have to engender with the people with whom you're working. These are very precious properties to them. Pete the Cat is another one that Kristen and Liz brought. And to Mike's point again, he's a local author. But when he saw what we did with that character, I mean, he teared up. He loved what we did. So I think having those relationships and, knowing who you need to go to in the process, to first of all, but then being patient with the process, understanding their need to have some input and some guidance over what you're creating based on their work is really important. And that all builds relationships. And I think that's probably all I can add above what Mike had to say.
She's done. Okay, thank you, Therese. I forgot to mention that she's also a member of the UNIMA-USA board. Wait a minute, my camera's supposed to be on. There we go. Okay, and our final presenter is Brian Hull. He is an Emmy Award winner, and for 40 years, he's successfully created puppet and live entertainment shows for Opryland USA, Dollywood Theme Park, the Alabama Theater, and on his own. And he also dedicated 25 years to the creation of the award-winning Wishing Chair Productions at the Nashville Public Library, which garnered praise for constantly bringing up to 100,000 patrons a year. So, are you ready, Brian?
I'm ready. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to just reinforce what Mike and Therese have said and probably add some new things, just tell you some stories about my experience. The most important thing that overall that I have to say is you have to research if you have an idea. Do not assume anything. Don't assume something is public domain. Don't assume you can use music that is not yours. So I started at the library taking over Tom Tischner's position. He was famously puppeteer who did puppet shows at the Nashville Public Library for over 50 years. And the idea is to take children's books and adapt them into puppet shows. Now, at the time I was hired, I was working for Sony BMG as a songwriter. And I told them that those songs that I write for these shows would have to belong to Sony during this time period. And so they worked out a contract for me, and thank goodness they did, that whatever songs I write for the shows belong to me, and whatever scripts I write for the shows belong to me. But the library can use them for any purpose. And I got this in writing, or else I couldn't be hired. So that ended up coming back and serving a purpose. I had written a show about Charlie Chaplin using actors and shadow puppets. And I was able to get the rights to license the Little Tramp character, because you can't use the Little Tramp in a show about Chaplin unless you get permission, which I did. And so it became this whole thing, and Metro lawyers found out about this and decided that Metro Nashville needed to own this script. And so I'm like, no, I had this in writing that I own my scripts. And they're like, well, that's no good anymore. You can just throw that out the window. And so I had to hire a lawyer myself to defend myself. And it went for several years. And they would send these contracts, and my lawyer would write a big no on it and send it back for about 3 years, until finally the head of the library intervened and made them stop. But I did have that contract that ended up saving all of that nonsense. At the library, all of Tischner's puppet shows were based on classic stories that are in public domain or shows that he wrote himself. But I would be commissioned to write certain puppet adaptations based on certain books that are not in public domain, like Tomas and the Library Lady, and this one, A Child's Calendar by John Updike, who then came to see the first show, which was a great honor. But working at the library was a very lovely thing. Our biggest show, and going in a different direction, our biggest show was a collaboration with the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum called String City. It tells the history of country music recording from the beginning up until today, but with puppets. And Philip Huber, I got him involved as a consultant, and he actually built the Dolly Parton marionette and Hank Sr. marionette, and they're fantastic. So it's mostly marionettes, lots of shadow puppetry and puppets, the whole gamut. A big, big show. But we hired an entertainment lawyer to deal with all the artists and songwriters. So we figured out who was going to be in the show. I did all these storyboards, I wrote a script, and then we approached the artists and songwriters. And some interesting things happened. For example, Taylor Swift was the easiest person to deal with. She said, "You can have anything you want." And she answered on the day that we asked. Ernest Tubb and Flatt and Scruggs, for their 2 songs, each wanted $75. And then we could use it. Okay, so we paid them $75. The Johnny Cash estate wanted to see what the puppet of Johnny Cash would look like before they would give their approval. Alabama, the band Alabama, is represented as Mount Rushmore singing mountain music. You might remember that song. And so they are famously in a fight with their drummer, and they said, "You can do it, but you have to take the drummer out." And I said, "Well, we can't have Mount Rushmore with 3 heads." So our other option was to use Elvira, the Oak Ridge Boys, and do something to represent that style of music and that type of band. And then they just agreed and said, no, you can do that. So it's in the show. But the most fascinating was, and I won't tell you who it was, but you all have heard of him, very, very famous country music artist, still alive, was going to end the show singing a very famous ballad of his that would transition into the song, "Will the Circle Be Unbroken," which is the theme of the Country Music Hall of Fame, and also starts the show with a shadow puppet version of the Staple Singers singing "Will the Circle Be Unbroken." And so we asked that he be represented, and his manager wrote and said no, because doing that would compromise one of his greatest hits. So I took him out. Then about 2 weeks before the show opened, there was a change of heart. And they said, "You have to put him back in." And I'm like, "No, we can't put him back in. We've already done the lighting. We've already rehearsed the show. It's all, impossible." And they're like, "Oh, you will put him back in. And you will create a marionette of him, because there's a red carpet to open the show where all the puppeteers would walk, all the marionettes in this red carpet. And he's probably going to be there. So you have to make a marionette of him." So what we ended up doing was taking the head off of a puppet that we weren't using and replacing it with a head of this artist. And as we were lining up, one of the puppeteers was still painting his faces. It was still, so the paint was all wet while we were walking the puppet, but that's a fun little story. Some things that are serendipitous. Ketch Secor approached me because of String City. He is the head of Old Crow Medicine Show, and asked that we adapt his book Lorraine into a puppet show, which we did. And then we got Old Crow Medicine Show to play on the entire soundtrack. And that's great. And so no need to worry about rights with that. At one point, I was asked to write a show about Duke Ellington. And there was a Disney book, a book that Disney published about Duke Ellington. And I tried to contact them, and I wrote them, and lawyers wrote them, and they just never answered. And that's historically a thing. Disney has its own challenges in that way. And I'll give you a little story. Long ago, I was in a play that was written by Sheldon Harnick, famously wrote Fiddler on the Roof and other shows. And he knew about my work in puppetry and animation, and he was being approached to write songs for a new Disney animated film about the Ugly Duckling. It never materialized. But he said, "I got this contract from them, And it says, as soon as I put pen to paper, it belongs to them. Meaning, if I wanted to use it in a review of any of my songs, I cannot. And if they don't like it, they can change it for any reason. They don't need his permission. And if they change it, whoever they bring in to change it, that person will be paid out of his salary. Now, here's this great, great man, famous Broadway songwriter. And he says, how am I supposed to sign a contract like this? But, Disney has its own things, and then theme parks as well. As he mentioned, I worked for Opryland and Dollywood, and for the last 20 years, I've been adapting children's books into stage plays for Dollywood's Imagination Library. And like Disney, as soon as pen goes to paper, they own it, and you understand that. So you can't come back and say, no, what about this, what about that? That's the understanding, or you don't work for them. And I think a lot of theme parks sort of follow this idea. So we did a whole bunch of books. They're all part of Dolly's Imagination Library, which are Penguin books. The mainstay is the little engine that we created. It still goes on today. There are 3 shows a year. Puppets built by the wonderful Wood and Strings people, if you remember, Clarissa Lega and Leon Fuller. They built these train puppets that are still being used today. So on a side note, if you're building things for theme parks, they need to be indestructible. They just do. Llama Llama, Red Pajama, et cetera, whole bunch. A lot of these puppets, Llama Llama, are built by Adrienne Rose, if you know her, and Shannon Shrum, a ventriloquist. Lots of puppetry, but it helps because Dolly is a name, of course, and people want to give permission right away because of Dolly's involvement in these shows. As far as my own shows, the one I'm doing now, I have 2 shows based on the work of Janusz Korczak, Kitek the Wizard. And I'm still doing the show, even though I'm no longer at the library. I'm touring with Kitek and King Mat I, which is Janusz Korczak's other famous children's book. Now, Kitek was written in 1933, or published in 1933, and it's only been in English for nearly 10 years. And so I jumped on this. I had the same entertainment lawyer we worked with in String City contact the publisher, who was in Israel, and they say, yes, of course, please make a puppet show of this, but it has to travel. Everything I write for the library stays in Davidson County because of taxes. It's a government job, very unusual, but it cannot go outside of Davidson County. So I asked the library, and they said, no, we cannot produce this for you because everything has to stay in Davidson County. That's the rule. So I built it myself in my basement and found funding elsewhere. But I did have to pay, I do pay a percentage because it's only been in English. And even though the story is public domain, I used the English translation by Antonia Lloyd-Jones, who did this translation because I liked it so much. Now you think that, why would I have to pay a percentage? Because they have everything to gain. We're promoting their book. They're actually, selling hundreds of these books as we promote the show. Well, how important is it to you? And it's important to me. So finally, I have a story that is not about a puppet show, but it can show you how things can go wrong. And it's about Ernie Kovacs. Long ago, I wrote a play about Ernie Kovacs that tells his life story in the style of his television show. So it actually uses excerpts from his show, which ironically mirrored what was going on in his life. And then I wrote other scenes in between in the style of his show that kind of put everything together. So the whole play takes place at a TV studio. And we did a reading of it with Tennessee Repertory Theater, and it went kaboom. We got the William Morris agency involved. Vincent Patterson, a famous director, choreographer, was going to direct, and there was $4.5 million attached to it. But Edie Adams owned all the rights to the television stuff. And she was so difficult to deal with, just simply put. And we just couldn't get anywhere with her. And this went on for years until finally I said, you know what, let's just stop. Let's stop. I've got other things to work on. So sometimes it just doesn't work out. So my advice is, again, don't just assume that you can get away with anything. You have to investigate the music. You have to investigate the rights. You have to investigate copyright. Find an entertainment lawyer to represent you. Someone who knows the business. And just understand that sometimes it won't work out for you and you need to move on. And that's my contribution. Thank you very much. Back to you, Marianne.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Those are some great stories. Not on? Okay. I should be on now. There I am. So I'd like to have my presenters back on the screen. And we do have some questions in the Q&A. And then I'll read them to you as there we go. All right.
May I add something, Marianne, before we start?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So one thing I did want to say is that some, especially new books that may never have had, like, for example, Poncho Rabbit and the Coyote, they did not even have a mechanism within that company to give me rights. I had to, be prepared to come up with your own licensing agreement, which can be daunting. So, and you will need legal guidance on that to make sure that all that stuff is covered, to Brian's point. So don't assume that if you go to a publisher for those rights that they're going to have sort of a boilerplate kind of agreement that's available to you. It may not be the case at all. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Therese. Okay, so let's see what's in the Q&A. Okay, from Rachel. I'm curious about smaller productions, the local librarian or little bookstore that does a short straight from the book adaptation, maybe with puppets or props, to make it a bit larger than the book itself. Do these folks need the same permission?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody ready to take that answer?
Is it free? What you're doing free?
She doesn't say. But I would imagine if it's in a library or bookstore that it's free.
Yeah, I mean, I often wonder what agreements libraries have with publishers as far as, doing story times or doing a thing. Like there was a local library that was having an event that was kind of themed to Mo Willems books, but they weren't charging anything for it. But yeah, I really don't know, like if it's something like in a library, it's like a story time kind of thing, and either you're already a staff member but you're not getting paid extra to do it. I don't want to say yes, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably story times are fine on that scale. But remember, during the pandemic, a lot of librarians would get on and read books, and these publishers lifted the rights for a while. But then when those, after a certain time period, maybe 6 months or something, you had to remove those videos or remove most of them. They ended up.
And I would say that video is more problematic than just a live performance, obviously, especially a free one. I always, err on the side of getting permission, but I think if it is free and it is the library, it'll probably be pretty easy for you to get permission to do that.
Okay.
If it's live and not streaming.
Right. Okay, from Anonymous. What if you want to create a puppet/stage adaptation of a VHS cartoon and not necessarily a book? Does the same stuff apply to other types of media aside from books?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to, same thing, you have to find out who owns the rights and contact them and see what they say.
Right.
Okay, so another anonymous. What stories are adaptable without this process of obtaining rights? Example, folktales?
Anything in the public domain that's more than 100 years old, I think maybe I'll ask my fellow panelists to check me on that, but I think if it's in public domain.
Who now? Did you think it's frozen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I said you can do Winnie the Pooh. It's now in
that's
public
true.
domain. Interestingly.
You just can't put him in a red shirt.
Right. And if for a long time people were doing Peter Pan, which was not public domain. And I don't know that it is now either.
And even public domain things change. Peter and the Wolf used to be in public domain, but then somehow the ancestors got it back out of public domain, and so it's very costly to perform that. So that's why if a symphony is going to do Peter and the Wolf, they'll do one performance.
Wow.
Okay, so Austin would like to know, can any of you speak to the legality of using illustrations as character design for a piece that you have the rights to? Have you found that illustration rights come separately from text or content rights? Looking at pieces like Pete the Cat or Rudolph, where the puppets are perfect and beautiful replications of the original illustrations.
Yeah, I think it's, at least for the most part, I think it would be assumed that you get to use, if you have the rights to the book, you get to use the images
And
from
I think
the book.
And I would agree with Mike in that that's what they expect. If you move away from that, then you're not respecting the property. So I think the closer you stay to the authenticity of the book, the better, and the least pushback you're going to get from the rights holders.
Right.
Okay, so I have Arlie is asking, are there any issues that come up when working with a script company that wrote the scripts for actors, but we're doing a puppet adaptation versus using actors?
Brian may be able to say something more to this as far as performing published scripts, but I mean, generally they want you to stick to, what's in the published script.
Right.
And so you got to figure out a way how to make it work with puppets.
Right. Absolutely. I think just communication up front will save you. For example, there's a famous story here in Nashville where a theater company did a production of Waiting for Godot, but they used 2 women instead of 2 men as the lead characters. And the show opened and the Beckett estate found out about it and shut it down.
Wow.
Right. And, if you get these Broadway shows, it is expected that you do not change the language. You stay as close as you can. But all of that is changing kind of, but not in every instance.
Yeah.
So you really need to get, just communicate and let them know if it's all cool.
And when we did The Little Prince, there were 2 versions available of the script, one that was a musical, but one that was not a musical. And because our shows need to be under an hour, we didn't want the musical, of course, but the non-musical was still over an hour. So we told them we needed to cut it some, and they asked how many minutes you're going to cut it, what are you going to cut? And so we told them what we needed to cut, and they said okay, in order to shave off time.
Yeah, so I mean, that relationship building and trying to be authentic, but honoring the product, I think is where you're going to get that kind of flexibility.
Mhm.
So Connie wants to know, how much legal gets involved if you write your own and make your own music?
Is
I'm assuming that she's writing her own music as opposed to just playing somebody else's music.
Is she writing her music for a protected property? So is she writing music for the Stinky Cheese Man?
No, I
I
think it's, she says if you write your own, and I'm assuming she would mean you write your own script and make your own music. Then
It's
you want-
yours,
yeah, it's yours.
Sure.
I think, right, everybody?
Yeah, sure, unless you have a music publishing deal, and then, you know, you have a contract with them for several years at
Right.
least.
Okay, and Lorraine wants to know, in your experiences, is it better to publish an original story as a book before performing it as a puppet piece to protect yourself in some way?
no, I mean, if I think if you're talking about an original play that you're wanting to do, you don't need to publish it as a book. I mean, if you create the script, you own the script.
Mhm.
It's, I think, I mean, I think that's how it works.
I mean, you can copyright scripts too, if you want to
Yeah.
protect yourself. So,
Yeah. So
Right.
if it's your original
It's-
creation, you own it. It doesn't have to be a published book.
Right, and it's very inexpensive for you to copyright your own material. The Copyright Office does research on all those. If you once you sign up and fill out the form, and they go and look and see if anyone has it, and if you know pay it in a very small amount, I think you can own the copyright to your own work. So you know that's an option.
okay, and I've got two more. I've got James, and he says, when adapting a stage script, i.e. Go Dog Go, which is different from the actual book, can you change it back to the book? So I'm assuming that he means you got a script and now you want to make it closer to what is in what the book is.
Yeah, not as Brian was saying earlier. It's like, no, if you're paying for the script, you've got to do what's in the script.
Right.
Just interesting thing about Go Dog Go is that it's mostly pantomime. There's some dialogue, but very little. So it's mostly pantomime, and the script spells out what's happening. It comes with music, and the script spells out descriptions of what's happening. So we took a little leeway with that because a puppet couldn't do the exact thing that the stage descriptions were saying, but we got the same idea across. But yeah, you wouldn't. I mean, with Go Dog Go, it's everything that's in the book is in the script. But yeah.
Okay. And Debbie wants to know, what is the process for finding out who has the rights for a deceased author or illustrator?
Google.
Research.
You find out if
Have
there's a
to dig.
foundation. Yeah. You
Yeah.
find out if the family has something out there. I mean, a good place to start is to see who published the books. Reach out to the publisher first to find out if the publisher still has the rights, or upon the death, if the rights then went to the family or to an estate, or yeah, you just have to do some legwork and start reaching out.
It takes time. These things take a lot of time.
Right. And if you can afford an entertainment lawyer,
Yeah.
they will do that for you.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the top and make sure I got everybody. I did get everybody. Yeah, I did.
Oh, there's one Arlie Chadwick
Oh,
at the bottom there.
here we go, right. How do you balance the cost of building puppets with IP copyright holder approval? The issue is I can't afford to build the whole show so they can see it and then give approval.
I mean, we've never run into the situation where they need to give approval. And now I'd heard that the center had to do a lot of work with the Rudolph production to make sure it was as close as possible. But I mean, we've never, except for that Martha Speaks situation where the PBS wanted to see what the puppets looked like and just gave a single note. But they didn't see a video of the final production or anything like that.
Right. If you can draw it, it's like the Johnny Cash puppet. Before his estate said yes, they wanted to see what the puppet looked like.
Right. And you're going to be storyboarding and doing designs anyway. It's part of your process, or I won't assume, but it's part of the center's process. So those can easily just, as long as they know the reason that we choose a property is for its distinctive characters and design. So we want to be as accurate to that as we can. So getting a nod from a publisher is usually pretty easy because our creative team is really very fastidious about that.
Mm-hmm. And if you can storyboard, that can help you in different ways. For example, I gave my script of K-Tech the Wizard to these people who ended up financing it, and they read it, and they're not used to reading scripts. And they're like, we can't figure out what you're doing. So I storyboarded it, and then they could understand, they could see it. And likewise, they can see what the puppets would look like. They can see what you're doing. Sometimes you're dealing with people who this just isn't their world.
Exactly.
And then Connie wants to know how much legal should get involved if you write your own script and make your own music based on the book.
Is it your book?
I would gather not.
Yeah, I think she's saying if you get the rights to the book, but then you write the script, you make the music.
That's a tough one.
It's case by case, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I think they would need to work very closely in that case with the rights holder to make sure that they don't have a situation that ends up being untenable, and they've spent all their time and interest and resources doing something that ultimately gets killed.
Okay. So Connie wants to know, if you find a book you like and want to make into a puppet show, which or whom do you contact first, the author or the publisher?
That depends. I mean, yeah, oftentimes I think you'll contact the author and they'll say, great, contact the publisher. If you contact the publisher, more than likely they'll have to talk to the author, or maybe, I don't know. It kind of depends.
I agree. Like for a local author or somebody that might be known or that you met at a book festival. Sometimes when I was struggling with the publisher, I reached back out to the author to say, I'm really trying to get this rights to, for your book. Can you verify that I'm at the right place with the right people talking to, and that got a little more movement. So I would, it really is case by case, but you have to take it from every angle you can think of, I think.
That's your point about research there. Yep. Okay, well, I do not have any more questions listed here.
There was one that I accidentally answered on text.
Oh, okay.
After I answered it, I realized, oops, I wasn't supposed to type an answer. But Michelle O'Donnell had asked approximately what was the cost per copyright when you applied for Go Dog Go, Snowy Day, and Little Prince. I said I didn't remember and to contact plays for new audiences, but I did look in my laptop real quick. Last time we did Snowy Day, It may have been for the center. I can't quite remember, but that was in 2021. It was $100 per performance to get the license.
Mhm.
So it was a per performance fee, and that was just for that title. Little Prince was different. Go Dog Go was different. Don't remember what those were, but they were. Yeah, it varies. It depends on the title. Depends on the publishing company. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. So first of all, I want to thank you three so much for all of your time and putting this together, and wonderful information and wonderful stories. And I think that, we all have really benefited a lot from this. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to thank Sarah, who was our technical person, who was running everything for us today. And I want to urge everyone to join UNIMA-USA. You can go to unimausa.org for membership information. There you go. Thank you. And for all of you who came, we really appreciate that you came, and we really hope that you got a lot out of this. I know that I did. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think that's it. And we did it in time.